Welcome back to the Iran Policy Podcast. In this episode, we will discuss the Iranian regime's propaganda and demonization efforts against the Iranian resistance. This includes media efforts and pressure campaigns against the friends and supporters of the resistance. Joining us is Ingrid Betancourt. She is a renowned human rights activist. She's a former Colombian senator and a presidential candidate. She has extensive experience with the propaganda and disinformation campaigns of the regime. Ms. Betancourt will help us better understand the tactics used by the Iranian regime to undermine the opposition and sow confusion among the public. We'll be exploring her experience, her research, and her insights into the true nature of the Iranian regime's smear campaigns against the Iranian resistance. Thanks for joining us, Ms. Betancourt.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Ajit.
Okay, so let me start the conversation with your own personal experience. So you had a speech recently at the French National Assembly, and you mentioned your own first encounter with the Iranian resistance and the backlash you faced afterwards. So tell us a bit what happened after you met Mrs. Maryam Rajavi.
Okay, this was some months after my liberation. I was captive for many years in the hands of Colombian terrorist organization. And I was invited to attend and speak a conference promoting human rights. And I remember it was an important conference. People that I knew and that I admired were there. I remember Elie Wiesel and other people that I really respected. So I felt very confident in joining. And to my surprise, when the conference ended, I was attacked on the net violently. And then I began receiving through my emails links to what was announced like the truth about some of the organizers of this conference, in particular the MEK. And well, I was surprised because how could they know my emails? How was I targeted personally? It was really a moment of a surprise, and yeah, it was uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. And so I gather that, as you said, it was some sort of like an organized, systematic way of targeting you.
Yeah, absolutely. It was personal. Mm-hmm. It was harsh. And I didn't understand why it was on me. And it took me a while to just put it together, if you wish.
Mm-hmm. And so what was the nature of the accusations that they were throwing at the Iranian resistance, at the MEK, at Mrs. Rajavi?
Well, first, they were saying that it was a group of terrorists. And so because I had been in the hands of terrorists for so many years, 6.5 years, abducted by terrorists, this was something that for me was like a very, serious accusation. Then they were saying that there were communists, and I had been abducted by a communist organization in Colombia. So I didn't want to get near any of this. And then there was also the accusation that the leader of the organization, Maryam Rajavi, was the head of a cult organization. And it just sounded false, because as I had been in the conference and I had met Maryam Rajavi, the contact I had with her didn't bring me to think that she could be a terrorist. I know terrorists. I know how they behave. I know communists too, and I thought that this was a very non-sectarian, non-extreme person. She was Muslim, clearly Muslim, in the way she behaved, in the way she dressed. And then I couldn't think that she was the head of a personal cult organization. So that was really disturbing for me.
Makes sense. And I guess out of your own personal experience, there were a lot of false alarms you saw there. So, and you decided, I guess, to do your own research and find out. I mean, the easiest way would be to just let it go, not want to have anything to do with this organization. But I guess you decided to persist and do your own research and find out the truth. Why did you do this? And what was your experience? How did you do that research and find out the truth and relate to your own experience?
Yes, because I think that all the alerts were in red. I could sense that there was something that was not right in everything that was told. And so I began searching by my own means. And so I got in contact with, for example, American generals of the American army that had been in the sites and who could give me information about the MEK. I also spoke with political leaders I could reach that I knew, that I respected, that I knew, I mean, personally, I knew them personally. So for me, they were credible. I also was in contact with UN officials. And I wanted to know, with the backup and the support of a respected international organization like the UN, what they thought. And I was surprised, because then I discovered lots of things that made me, that really made me think that I had to just fight for the human rights of Iranian people. That's when I began to understand what was going on. I remember I discovered historical facts, the history of these people, of the people of the MEK, how their leaders, for example, had been, targeted by the Khomeini regime, that they had to flee Iran because they had been an extermination campaign against all of them. How they had been jailed for just being in the opposition and being vocal of not wanting to support the regime. How not only they were jailed, but how they were executed by the thousands, and executed by the thousands after being tortured and after going through mock trials. And I began to realize that these people were not the perpetrators, they were the victims. And so I'm always in the side of the victims, of course. And then I discovered other facts that were very, very important to me. Like, for example, the fact that the organization, in order to disclose secret information that finally led to denouncing secret sites of nuclear sites, where the regime was trying in a secret way to launch a nuclear program, to build the nuclear bomb, of course violating all the agreements, all the international agreements. And how the fact that this was denounced by the MEK permitted first to go and visit, discover the sites, map the sites, and begin what we now know as a nuclear agreement in order to stop that making of the bomb. The MEK was very important in protecting the world, the free world, from this type of strategy. And then everything was like so targeted in a way that was for me, I could see that there were lots of lies, because of course I could do fact checking, and I could see that was on the sites and on the links and on the information was not true. And then I could also check on the sources. And then I began to see that the sources were always the same names of journalists. And then I began to see that they were they were allied to the regime. They were not independent sources. That's how I did my research. And I came to the conclusion that this was a very serious situation, that we were talking about not only the banners, the freedom of this organization, but it was about what was going in Iran. I mean, the people of Iran, the women in Iran. It was the whole country that had been abducted by a misogynistic regime. And this regime had all the means, all the money, all the power in order to maintain this abduction, maintain the population hostage. And also they were exporting terrorism. And then I thought that it was very, very important to take sides and get to know them better, and try to see how we could help in order to unveil the truth.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that you said it's the irony that the victims, the perpetrators of terrorism, are the ones who are accusing the victims of the crimes that they themselves have committed. And as you said, when you follow the lead, when you connect the dots, when you follow the trail, this disinformation campaign always leads back to the regime. So my next question for you would be, so what is the aim of Iranian authorities, the Iranian regime, to spread these lies and to put pressure on people who want to support the Iranian resistance? And how does it relate to the role that the MEK, the NCRI are playing in the cause for freedom in Iran?
Well, I think, of course, it's fear. I think it's a problem of fear. I think this is first, the MEK is the only organization that really had survived the political cleansing perpetrated by the regime. So they haven't been able to erase them. They have still a network inside Iran, and they have been constructing a network of support internationally. And I think, there's a proportion between the amount of information or disinformation the Iranian regime puts into the net, and all the efforts they do to try to erase the MEK, and the fact that the MEK is really, I believe, a threat to the regime, a threat because they are in a very structured way organizing themselves to counteract and oppose a fearless, bloodshedding regime. I was, for example, one of the things that I came to understand was that when they were accusing the MEK to be a cult organization, it was because they were accusing the MEK of what they were. They were the ones who had a cult organization, first with Khomeini, now with Khomeini. And it was really, they were accusing the MEK of all the things they knew they were doing. Terrorism is what they do. In a way, using the religion as a means to maintain a dictatorship is also something that relates to fanatic use of ideology that is proper to communism. So it was, for me, very interesting to see how they were targeting the MEK with what they knew they could be targeted themselves and accused being themselves. And for me, it's very, very clear that they want to destroy the MEK because they fear the MEK, because they know they have a structure, they know they have support internationally, they know, and they know they're right. I mean, because the MEK is in the right side of history, and they are in the defensive mode.
And that perfectly makes sense. And I also wanted to get your perspective on maybe like a slightly different angle on the same topic. So when you have this, as you said, it's like the only organized movement that is fully dedicated to bringing establishing a democratic state. And what are they to gain by, when you have this alternative, what does the regime gain by discrediting this opposition movement? So what's the message that they're trying to send to the nation states, to the international community, to everyone who's watching the scene in Iran?
Well, I think that today, I mean, it has changed with time, but I think that today it's very, very important for the regime to just try to convince the whole world that there's no alternative, and that in spite of the mayhem that is actually taking place in Iran, we have seen the protests, we have seen executions, we have seen women beaten and killed by the police. We have seen the protests of the Iranian people protesting against the regime and claiming to this regime to end. And of course, the world, and I would say the Western world, is always cautious because Iran is a big country, an oil producer, and they don't want to have, let's say, chaos coming into Iran. And the Iranian regime, the theocratic, misogynistic, Mullah's regime, is in the position to saying, we're the only ones. There's nobody else in the place. So we can do some reforms, but there's no alternative. And this is important not only in the international scene. I think it's also important inside Iran to try to make people believe that they are the only alternative, that there's no opposition, and there's no one to take over from them. And that's what we need to face. It's a fake narrative. I think that most of Iranians know this is not true. That's why they're asking in the streets for a change of regime. But I think there is in the international community a lack of understanding, a lack of information, and also probably wanting to accommodate for some time more to the Iranian regime in order to be able to face other big problems in the international scene, like, for example, the Ukrainian war, the tensions between China and Taiwan. And I would say that this is something that we have to confront, because if the Western world is wanting to gain some time, we have to know that that time is being paid with lives that are cut, people that are being killed and that are dying before their time. And this is also a responsibility the Western world has in this whole situation.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And you just mentioned at the end of your comments that as the international community dithers on the issue, there are lives at stake in the streets in Iran. And so, as we know, there are two main pillars that the regime uses as tools of policy. One is, as you said, is how they repress, the suppression that they carry out on any form of dissent, protests, gatherings, anything that the regime does not like inside the country, that's domestic suppression. And on the other hand, it's the export of terrorism, international terrorism. And I guess, and I wanted to get to that a bit later on, you yourself were the target of one such attempt in 2018. So I wanted to see how you see these efforts at demonizing, discrediting the opposition. How does that tie in with those two tools of policy that the regime is using? So on the one hand, suppressing the protests, and on the other hand, having the free hand to carry out terrorist acts against the opposition and its gatherings, its activities, its supporters abroad.
Well, in a very curious way, I think that they are applying the communist strategy of using all the means of fighting. And they are really using all the means of fighting in the sense that, I mean, they are killing ideas through disinformation, defamation, fake news, and they are killing people. And it's the same thing. It's the same objective. When you kill people, you're killing ideas. And when you are in a fake news campaign, in a defamation campaign, you are killing the resources we humans have to defend ourselves against abuse. So for me, I mean, I would say it's two ways of doing the same thing. Of course, when you kill physically people, you think that it's over. But what the MEK has demonstrated is that after having been slaughtered and having lived through mass killings, the ideas are still there. And young people are conveying those ideas because they are the ideas of human rights. And there is no end to that. So it's very interesting to see how they are combining those ways of trying to just erase from the face of the earth and history the attempt of human nature to just oppose abuse and arbitrary.
And that makes sense. That's a very interesting observation. So with defamation, you paved the way for killing dissidents, and at the same time, you use that kind of, as you said, killing that idea to make sure that that same idea, that those same motivations for freedom, those aspirations do not rise again, because as you said, the regime has had that experience in the past, killing tens of thousands, more than 100,000 of MEK supporters and members, and yet the movement still lived. And they're trying these tactics, which are sort of like the flip side of the same coin, to try to at all costs destroy the opposition. Now, I wanted to get your perspective on how this dovetails with the regime's export of terrorism. In 2018, you were at the Free Iran Summit in France, which was the target of a failed bombing attempt by a career diplomat, a Vienna-based Iranian diplomat, Asadollah Assadi, who tried to bomb the event. And fortunately, it was foiled. He was arrested along with his accomplices. They were tried and sentenced to long-term prison sentences. So how do you see the connection between these terrorist acts and how the regime uses these demonization campaigns, efforts to pave the way for such terrorist activities?
As I was saying, I think that it all goes together. For example, let's see what happened with Asadollah Assadi. He is now in jail. He was an Iranian diplomat, let's not forget. So really a person of the regime, paid by the regime. In a way, an official of the regime. And he ends up in jail in Belgium with a condemnation of 20 plus years in jail for I mean, not killing because he didn't succeed in his attempt, but for attempting to kill and to bomb a rally in Paris, in Villepinte, where, as you said, I was present. So we all had been, if he had succeeded, we wouldn't be talking today. So the justice in Belgium was very keen in addressing this situation, and it was the maximum condemnation that this person could have. Immediately after, the Iranian regime began to arrest tourists coming from Belgium, coming from France, coming from all Europe, people that had nothing to do whatsoever with politics. And the regime accused them in the most unspeakable way to be spying against the regime. I'm thinking of course, a Belgian young man, Van der Kassel, who is at the forefront of this fight, who has been tortured, who has been sentenced to be whipped, 100 whips, for something that he hasn't, for a crime that doesn't exist. Of course, it's very easy for a authoritarian regime like the Iranian regime to make false claims. And if they're spies, it's even easier if they are accused of spying, because spying should be secret. So there's nothing to show, there's nothing to prove, there's nothing about anything. But then they torture people and they make them say under torture false acceptance of criminal deeds that of course they didn't commit. There's another girl that I'm really watching closely. It's the case of Cécile Colère. She's a very, very young teacher, a French teacher, that now is again accused of being a spy. What this tells us is that we are confronted with a regime that has no morality, no ethics, and that they will do whatever in order to obtain what they wish to obtain. We have seen, for example, how they pay journalists, how they bribe people, how they neutralize governments by making them aware that if they behave in the way the Iranians want, they could have a reward in personal terms, like, for example, signing an agreement that is important for their political career, or to have economic gains that would be important for the economy of their countries. And through the carrot and the stick, they have been able to neutralize the right of the Iranian people to live in democracy and freedom. And this is why I think that we have to be very, very alert and conscious of what's happening. And we need to ask the Western governments not to kneel before what the Iranians are asking for, because this is opening a door to losing our values, to losing our principles, and to feeding the monster. I think it's a monster, the Iranian regime. They're capable of anything.
Makes sense, perfect sense. So I wanted to finish off with how you would give recommendations to other people who are exposed to this overwhelming propaganda that the regime wages against the Iranian resistance. As you said, it's a very eloquent, it's a very complicated operation that they're carrying out. It's targeted, they spend a lot of money on it and resources. And so you hear this sometimes from news outlets or media outlets that are supposedly very authoritative, the people are supposed to trust them, and they spread these same lies that the regime is disseminating. And a lot of people are just going to take those things at face value and are going to believe them. So what would be your advice to someone who is exposed to this overwhelming propaganda against the Iranian resistance for the first time? How can they avoid falling victim to that kind of these propaganda claims that the regime is making?
I think that today, because of the capacity to spread all kind of true information or false information through the net, and it applies to the Iranian case, but it applies to everything we do in our normal life, is to just have a critical eye to everything we read, having an open mindset in order to always think, I would say, think bad first. Think who has an interest in sending that information to you and putting it in front of your eyes. How much it costs to have you read that information in terms of propaganda, and who's behind. And there's a saying that when you want to find the murderer, you should always ask who's behind, who profits from that information. And those are things that we should do, train ourselves to do it like automatically, that our brain just doesn't take everything with face value, but just try to understand what are the interests that lie behind everything or anything we read. That would be my advice.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much. It makes sense. And thank you for being with us on this program. Really appreciate it, and appreciate everything that you're doing for the Iranian people, for the resistance. And hopefully we would like to have you again on the program sometime soon.
I would love that, Majid, really.
Thank you very much.
I think this is a very important cause. For me, it's one of the most important causes today that we have to fight for, because it merges freedom, human rights, and women's rights. And it all goes together. We need to fight for our right to live in peace, and we need to stop a terrorist state like the Iranian regime, and we need to work together, and always with hope that at the end of the tunnel, we'll see the light.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, this is a wrap for this episode of Iran Policy Podcast. See you next time.